Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Flyers Files here on BFA Sports. I'm Kevin Durso, your host, and before we get into another edition of the show, another week of Flyers hockey to discuss, just a reminder to follow along everywhere you get your podcasts. You can listen to the show. You can watch the show on YouTube, on the Twitter X platform. I'm at Kevin_Durso for anything that you need regarding Flyers hockey coverage, any news updates, in-game updates, game previews, game recaps. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Kevin_Durso for your pregame and postgame reels and get all of the information that you need about that night's game or what's happened in the game or anything that's going on in the world of the Flyers. So we got another week in the books, and it's been an interesting one for the Flyers because it's one that you look at and think about a few different things. Missed opportunities, still some success, still things to build on. So it's kind of one of those weeks that fall in the middle. It's a week that you take a lot away from it, and you also try not to take too much away from it because it's very on par with the rest of the league, and it's very much on par with what this team has given so far this season. So let's do the rundown of the last handful of games so far since the last show. Flyers played the night that the last show was out, that our last Wednesday when the last show was released. They played the Edmonton Oilers that night, started to really look the part in the second half of that game, but fall 2-1 in overtime because one mistake and it can end up in the back of your net. But that's really, and a game also that another mistake is made, that they think they have the game-winning goal, and it's called back on an offside that was blatantly obvious as Owen Tippett was in the zone. So Travis Konechny's potential game-winning goal with 23 seconds left goes by the wayside. And that's going to be kind of the theme of this a little bit, this idea of missed opportunities, because that's not the first time. It's not the first time the Flyers have had a potential game-winning goal called back for offside. It's not the first time that a game that ends up being a loss in overtime could have and probably should have been a win. There's really no excuse for what Tippett's doing to be in the zone early. It doesn't have an impact on the play. That doesn't matter when they challenge the play, when the opposition challenges. It doesn't matter whether it had an impact on the play or not. It still gets called back. But that was a game that you feel like you could have earned an extra point, and you should have earned an extra point, and you scored a goal with 23 seconds left that should have counted if not for a routine mistake that shouldn't be made. You think about the game that they played in Carolina, just the second game of the season. They think they've got the win, and it's called back for goalie interference instead. And sure, a more controversial call, not something that you sit there and fault the player for as a mistake, but it's a game that you don't get that extra point. And so those are two really big examples to me of near misses that could change the way we look at this team because of record, because of point total. Even if you want to be hyper-focused on the play, and we'll discuss the play itself in a moment, then yes, you have every right to believe that this team has a long way to go before they are what you want them to be. But if you were to look at the record and take away two of the overtime losses and turn them into wins, because you're talking about minor things here, the offside call, a controversial goalie interference call, you are talking about very close calls here, near misses that could easily add 2 points to your total and give you, instead of a 9-6-3 record like the Flyers currently have through 18 games, an 11-6-1 record. So that makes a huge difference, and it sounds like it would be a lot more easy to digest. You would be able to take that and you would actually probably look at that and say, well, what a positive that is, that they've won 11 games out of 18 to start the season, to start this tenure under Rick Tocchet. You don't feel that way as much when you even it out and you say there's 9 wins, there's technically 9 losses, even if 3 of them are in overtime. It leaves so much more. It feels like leaving meat on the bone a little bit, that there's room for more than what you've gotten from the Flyers so far. And it's just not quite there yet. The good news from that game against Edmonton was Matvei Michkov scored again. It was his 3rd straight game with a goal. Dan Vladar looked really good against a lineup that has a lot of talent in it. And for the most part, during the course of the game, the Flyers held their own. After the first period where they clearly got in some trouble against the likes of McDavid, Draisaitl really didn't have as much of an impact on the game. Evan Bouchard scores the first goal, et cetera, et cetera. The guys you expect from Edmonton are starting to do things in the first period. And then it felt like everything clamped down and the Flyers got what they needed out of it. There was a lot of shots in the game ultimately. Vladar ends up making 30 saves on 32 shots, but it's only that way because you factor in, the overtime in the third period. You're going to give up chances. Any power play that comes along is going to involve some chances. Vladar was really good, and you can take that for what it's worth and continue to file it away and build on what he's done to start the season. Then you get to Friday, and this is a game that's all over the map, and in all honesty is really the saving grace of the Flyers for this week, because without it, you're looking at, not only would this have been a bad loss, you're looking at possibly a win, certainly a winless week it would have been if they didn't win this game. But also the idea that, okay, you were close against Edmonton, probably deserved a better fate, played well enough to win the game. Ultimately, you looked like you were in position to do just that. It gets called back on a mistake. You file that away. You take the point that you get in overtime and try to move on. You were playing a team in St. Louis that does not score a lot of goals, does not provide a lot of offense, has not had very good goaltending or defense this year, gives up a lot of goals. They did give up a lot of goals in this game, but you were giving them up at equally as bad a clip and really needed to stop the bleeding at some point. This shouldn't be a 6-5 shootout win. It should be a regulation win based on scoring 5 goals. Just having the ability to put yourself in that position offensively to be in a high-scoring game, because that's a team that gives up a lot. The positives, Owen Tippett has a huge game. He had been silent for several games, not really contributing a lot. A goal and 3 assists. Trevor Zegras was really kind of the star of the show. He has 2 goals and assist, gets a penalty shot in overtime, and then scores the only goal of the shootout. Christian Dvorak, we're going to get into him a little bit more in the show, but Christian Dvorak with 2 goals and an assist in this game. And those 3 were playing on a line together. So that line was just doing all of the work, it felt like, getting all of the payoff. And then the big question here is Sam Ersson, because it was not a good game for Sam Ersson for 65 minutes or for 60 minutes. Does his job in overtime, and then the shootout comes and he looks like a Vezina winner. So you get kind of both ends of that with him. You needed it because you get the extra point out of it. You win the game, but it was really not a good performance from Ersson. It draws concerns. It's drawing more conversation to what should they do about that spot. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. And then finally, Saturday night, they follow that up. Now, you played 65 minutes. It's a high-scoring game. You had to come back from being down 3-1, 5-3. It's tough. And they go play a team in the Dallas Stars that is way more ready to contend for a Stanley Cup. They've been in that mode for several years. They have talent at every position. They have multiple lines that can do damage. And that's what you got. Dvorak gets another goal out of it. Vladar ends up with 23 saves in the game, but gives up 5. It was just one of those nights. And one of those players, Jason Robertson for Dallas, took over, has a hat trick in the game. It was one of those nights, and it kind of felt like it was building towards that. Dallas didn't play on Friday night. Their last game was Thursday. The Flyers had played Friday night, traveled, and then had to come out and play a team that's rested and ready and way more talented and pretty much just all in all outclassed the Flyers. So let's get into some of our topics for the week. And first off, this is going to be, again, this has been a common theme of a lot of games lately. In particular, all 3 games this past week, and it goes on beyond that, but slow starts have been a big problem for the Flyers, lately and kind of all season. It's great to be a team that's resilient. It's great to be a team that comes back. It's great to get wins in comeback fashion. They're emotional. They do something to fire a team up, and they can be a spark that gets a team rolling. But the Flyers gave up the first goal in all 3 games this week, gave it up to Edmonton, had to tie that up, gave it up to St. Louis early, within 2 minutes, has to come back. They get a goal, they give it right back. Another goal early second, they tie it up. You go to the third, 2 more early in the third, have to come back. That game felt like slow starts to the game itself and each period in a way. And then in Dallas, the first goal of the game was under 4 minutes in, and that just ballooned from there. I mean, it was pretty miraculous that they kept Dallas to a 1-0 lead going into the second half of the second period. So you were past the halfway point of the game, still competitive, 1-0, and it just ballooned from there. But this goes beyond that. So before Wednesday's game, the previous Saturday they played against Ottawa, started down 2-0 in the first period. The game before that was Thursday night against Nashville. They were down 1-0, 1:44 into the game. They had a couple of, before that, they played Montreal and jumped out to a 3-0 lead and then had trouble in the middle of the game. But they definitely didn't have a slow start in Montreal. But the game before that, you're playing Calgary, bottom feeder of the league right now, and you fell behind 2-0 to them. Now, that was a slow burn kind of thing. There was nothing in the first period. Calgary gets on the board, finally breaks the ice, and then adds another insurance goal. But you still are trailing. And when you trail 1-0, 2-0, whatever it may be, you're chasing the game. And that is a problem area for the Flyers. It's 6 out of 7 games where they've given up the first goal and had to chase the game in some capacity. And you didn't come back against Calgary. You did come back against Nashville. You came back to force overtime against Ottawa. You came back and got the game to overtime against Edmonton, should have won the game. You came back against St. Louis. And that's all well and good that you keep doing that you have that in you to keep coming back in games. But you have that ability now, and you may not down the road. Same concept as all these overtime games they have. You're doing fine right now. You're getting games to shootouts. You're winning in shootouts. That's great. Eventually 65 minutes a night catches up with you. Instead of the routine 60, instead of throwing in a lopsided 5-1 win for yourself in there, or just even just a typical 3-1, 4-2 kind of win where you get an empty net goal at the end. You need a few of those in there in regulation, and not just, and I understand that it's tough with the way the league is this year. It is as tight as it gets. There are a lot of games going to overtime. In fact, I believe it was the St. Louis game. It could have been. Yeah, I think it was the St. Louis game because the global series was happening in the NHL. So on Friday, there were only 4 games. One of them at 2:00 in the afternoon local time because of being in Sweden for the global series. And then 3 more games at night. And all 4 games went to overtime. And I think it was a first in NHL history that you had 4 games on the schedule and they all went to overtime or something like that. That's pretty telling about where the league is and how tight it is. So you want to be involved in these games. You just don't want to have to keep chasing the game to fight your way back into it and then require overtime constantly to get the win or decide your fate, because it's going to take a lot out of you going forward. I want to move on to a part of one of those comebacks and one of those slow starts. And Sam Ersson is certainly a topic of conversation right now. And Ersson has done a lot of successful things in his career to this point. You think about the way he came in and was still kind of the number 2 until everything with Carter Hart happened. That opened people's eyes to his potential, I would say, because people really liked what they were getting out of him. He was the better performing goaltender at the time. And then it's kind of been on the decline ever since. His usage had to go through the roof after everything with Hart happened anyway. So that was kind of the case for that year. And he's just had moments where he seems like he's one save off. There's that one goal a game that you sit there and you go, what happened there? How does that go in? He can't be letting that goal in. It happened for me when they played St. Louis on Friday. That happened multiple times. It probably happened out of the 5 goals 3 or 4 times. And among those, or within those, one, you're like, not only are you looking for saves, but you're also sitting there looking at this going, he's not even tracking the puck well. He's guessing wrong on where these shots are going. And that's a problem, that you seem like you have the vision for the shot coming at you. So you don't have anybody in your way. You don't have any reason. You should be able to be on your angle, and it's still finding a way to beat you. How is that happening? And the thing about this for Ersson is that it's constantly in games where the numbers don't look good. That he is going out into games, he had a game against Winnipeg early in the year. While the goalie rotation was still back and forth for a handful of games. And he gave up 5 goals on 15 shots, or the team did. One of them, I think, was an empty netter, but still. So you give up 4 on 14. When the Flyers played the Ottawa Senators on the previous Saturday, he allowed 3 goals on 14 shots. And while 2 of them are certainly not his fault, it doesn't look good. 3 goals on 14 shots does not look good. And it kind of happened again in St. Louis because as a team, you played 65 minutes and the St. Louis Blues managed 17 shots on goal, but still scored 5 goals. So 12 saves on 17 shots. Not at all going to instill confidence in the fan base. And you can tell that there is a vibe when I'm in the building and you're watching Sam Ersson play goal against Ottawa, for example. You can feel it in the crowd when he hasn't gotten a shot in a long time, like he did in that game against Ottawa, that you're waiting for the next one to go in, and the crowd is anticipating he's not going to make that save. And there is that anticipation, at least right now, with Vladar. That's a big deal also, to have confidence. And the Flyers keep saying all the right things about this, that, you ask anybody about the goaltending and about Vladar, and they'll throw Ersson in and say, both, Travis Konecny has said multiple times, both our goalies are great. It's hard to defend that when you look at the numbers. And Ersson's trying to do a lot. He works hard. He's a focused guy. He's composed. He doesn't get too high or too low. He's got a lot of the same qualities, really, that Vladar does. But the numbers are just not backing it up right now, and he's trying to find a way out of it. And the team is going to stand by, and I know there's a lot of conversation about that and about whether or not it's time to make a change. Should they move on from him? I'm going to tell you right now, first of all, you're not going to see trades involving guys like Sam Ersson in November. I just don't see that happening. And I know there's teams out there that want goaltending, need goaltending. I just don't think you're going to see it with a guy whose save percentage looks like Ersson's does and expect to get anything substantial in return. It's just not going to happen. I don't think the interest level is going to be so high. The reason why you stand by Ersson for now, and you really have to, is because once you traded Ivan Fedotov away and you kind of established there was a clear-cut 2 to the NHL, 2 to the AHL thing, you really need to get this right with the guys in the minors. And obviously a guy like Carson Bjarnason, who's 20 years old and a rookie to professional hockey, is not going to get a call-up this season. That's obvious. But Alexei Kolosov is not a stranger to the NHL. He played last year. He's played a game this year. Would you consider that move? And I think right now there's still a big focus on, unless Ersson's hurt, Kolosov needs to stay in the minors and play that year out so that he gets that developmental experience that he needs. And you can revisit this later. Maybe it's before the end of the season and you decide we're ready to make that change. Maybe it's in the offseason. Ersson doesn't have a contract yet for next year. And it's not impossible that you could just say, like, as much as we have faith in the guy and you want to stand behind him and give him that boost of confidence, you can make the decision as another year passes that maybe this isn't the right guy to be part of this. And you make that change, and you know that there's more coming down the road. But for now, that Kolosov might get the call then. Kolosov's going to need a contract too, for what it's worth. They're both RFAs. But either way, you're looking at a lot of situations with this where this is becoming one of your biggest problems in some of these games. And you're going to have to play a second goalie. You can't just ride Dan Vladar as the hot hand all season long to the tune of 65 games a season. It's not going to happen. So you have to be mindful of his usage while also balancing that you want to keep winning games. And if your message is going to be you're trying to win games and you're doing it in the way that you're trying to do it, you're going to have to give Vladar a substantial number of starts while he's going well, because that's what's going to give you the best chance to win. So it's tough, and it doesn't help matters that Vladar's numbers have been so good that it makes Ersson's look even worse. It can change quickly. If he goes out and has 2, 3, 4 good starts in a row, and he only has so many because of the injury to begin with, he can turn those numbers around and start looking like more and more of a viable backup option / tandem option and be played in way more games. But until then, he's got to figure out his game, and the Flyers really don't have a solution for it. So I want to talk about another player as we move forward into the next portion of this, and talk about kind of an unsung hero under the radar of these last handful of games this season in general, honestly, because it's been a really good start for several guys. And we've seen, especially among the offseason acquisitions, Trevor Zegras comes in, makes an immediate impact, more than a point per game player so far. How can you be dissatisfied with anything that he's given you so far? I mean, not saying he hasn't made some mistakes, but he's given you everything you could possibly expect and more, and looks a lot like the player that you hoped you were getting and trying to revitalize that career. Dan Vladar has been a surprise, and a positive one. You signed him thinking he was probably going to be the backup. That has changed quickly. He's given you much more than Ersson has. You're playing him more often as a result. You're winning a lot when he's in goal as a result. So that's a positive and probably was unexpected. But one of the offseason moves that you don't hear a whole lot about, or that kind of falls below Zegras and Vladar, at least because they've made a bigger impact, is Christian Dvorak. And Dvorak is really playing an important role here, because when you're a team like the Flyers that is trying to figure out a lot with the center position, you've got Sean Couturier, who's clearly not the same player he was 5 years ago. On the back nine, you need to put him in an appropriate place in the lineup to kind of reflect that. Noah Cates, his stock has risen year over year for the last several years, but he's not necessarily an elite offensive player. He's gives you solid numbers, and you're trying to see what the threshold of that can be, what the ceiling is for Cates as an offensive player, but you also know what Cates does best, which is his two-way play and the ability to contain top guys on the other team. And then you kind of go back and forth between Zegras was supposed to get some experimentation here, and they've kind of tabled that and have been playing him on the wing again a lot more because it has worked it out pretty well so far. And you have Rodrigo Abels playing fourth line center, which is another conversation to have down the road, where that line just hasn't been able to kind of make up for some of the deficiencies with the occasional goal or two to really take away from that. So you've got a few guys that you're playing regularly that I just don't think are going to make that much of an impact going forward. So that really leaves you kind of shorthanded on guys that play center. And then you get to Dvorak, who is not only playing as one of your centermen here, but really one of your better centermen. He's been very good all season long and pretty consistently. And now the numbers are kind of following him. He was obviously the big contributor over the weekend with 3 goals in the 2 games. But I think I thought about it, and as you watch him pile up those goals, 3 goals over the weekend gets him to 6 goals on the season. That's now tied for the team lead. And as much as it happens all of a sudden with 2 quick goals, against St. Louis, and then you add the other one against Dallas, Zegras scored 2 goals against St. Louis, and that got him to 6, so he was at 4. And Tippett's 6th goal of the season came in that St. Louis game as well, but it was his first in a while, so he got the first 5 rapid fire, and then picked up the 6th just recently against St. Louis. And as I look at that, it just doesn't feel like you expect to see, Zegras being up there is great. Konechny's the next one in line, and you're kind of waiting for the rest of the usuals to round it out. Michkov comes into that picture. Forster, you think, would be in that picture. Maybe a defenseman would find a way in. Tippett being in there, that kind of thing. And the third place player on the team right now in points is Christian Dvorak, who to me, as a free agent signing, was it's hard to call it under the radar because the amount of money he's making is not under the radar in the slightest at $5.4 million for 1 year. But it was a contract that I kind of feel like got lost in the Zegras conversation and now has gotten further lost in the early going of the season with Vladar's play. And to be honest, Dvorak's also getting lost among forwards in conversation when you think about ice time conversations. Well, that's an entirely Michkov conversation at this point. And Tippett's been his own conversation point. Konechny's been his own conversation point to a degree. Like, there's certain things people are talking about other guys on the team. And Dvorak just really kind of just goes under the radar with the whole thing and has given you numbers that are better than just about everybody on the team. So it's really impressive to look at Christian Dvorak and see what he's given you over the course of these first 18 games of the season and understand that this was a guy that was the thought process behind signing this guy was he's going to play on the fourth line. He's going to kind of be a placeholder for a year until they can figure out where they want to go with this thing. And now you're watching them have, potentially have to have conversations. You see what's happening with Zegras, right? And there's a big difference between Dvorak and Zegras when it comes to where they are in their careers. Dvorak is a veteran player, and I mean, Zegras is a veteran too, don't get me wrong, but Dvorak's really a veteran player. You don't exactly think of him as long-term guy for a rebuilding team, but you're so thin at center that you actually kind of are asking that question. When Zegras gets off to the hot start that he's been off to, and he's 24 and you acquired him and the object was to see how the fit was, to see what he had to offer, and then kind of decide whether or not he was going to be part of your core going forward, it feels like you've already seen enough to determine, yeah, you kind of want that guy around for beyond this season because there's a future still there and there's a lot to consider with him being part of it. If you can add, especially at the cost, it was a trade for Zegras. Yeah, you traded a draft pick in there or 2 draft picks or whatever it was, and Ryan Poehling. And it's like, that's what you subbed out for. And to be honest, if you took Ryan Poehling and subbed out Christian Dvorak on top of it, you're getting so much return on your investment for both things that it's hard to argue with the results. But Dvorak's an interesting case if you go beyond the season because he's already 29. He'll turn 30 in February. Do you need to go out and now re-sign a 30-year-old to play center when you want to develop that position more and find the guys you want to develop in that position? I don't know. The one thing that I will give Dvorak that's a benefit is his best seasons in the NHL have come under Rick Tocchet in the past, and it looks like he's finding that again. If you go and look at his seasons past, Dvorak's career high for goals is 18. His career high for points is 38. And he's at 6 goals and 13 points in 18 games. There's a possibility, at least. It's a little early to jump and say, 18 goals is definite, but he's more than on pace for it. Same thing with the point total. He's more than on pace to surpass that. But even if you look at his season last year in Montreal, 12 goals, 33 points, that certainly feels like it's going to be surpassed. He's halfway to the goal total, a third of the way to the assist total. He's 20 points shy of tying that point total. So it feels like that's an area where, or those are areas and that he's having that success again under Tocchet. And it makes you think about the future because you're starting to ask yourself, who's going to play in those spots? Is Zegras ever going to be a center? Where does Cates fall in line with this? Where does Couturier fall in line with this? Who else is going to play center? That might be the reason to keep Dvorak. There's also the possibility of, if you fall out of a playoff race, if you're not good enough to be a playoff team and you get to the trade deadline and Christian Dvorak's giving you numbers that are relevant like this, he'll have suitors and he'll have teams with interest. And it shouldn't be hard to get something decent for him in return in a trade. The question becomes whether or not you want to continue to do what you did for all the years you've been doing it so far in this rebuild process and trade a guy like Dvorak for, well, let's get another first-round pick and see what else we can get for it. And you're more and more past that at this point. And beyond being past that kind of collect draft picks stage of the rebuild, you're also looking typically in trades for something more of an immediate help. Like you would want another young player to kind of come in and fill that void if there's not somebody out there, in the minor leagues that's knocking on the door. So it's all things to consider with his future. In present, this keeps looking like a better and better signing because it's working for the Flyers. It's working for players around Dvorak to pick up some points. That all matters a lot right now, and he's fit in way better than I think a lot of people would have expected, or he's jumped out more than people expected, kind of all over the place with that. So he's definitely a player that you didn't expect to make as much noise that has, and that's going to be really, it's just right now it's a key in helping you win games and helping you be successful, and we'll see if that continues over the next several weeks as he continues to try to make himself part of the longer term picture. Rebuilding teams are not completely devoid of players in their 30s. Like, you don't just have a team of 25-year-olds and under and say, that's our rebuilding team, we're done. It's a lot more complicated than that, and Dvorak could certainly fit into the picture further if the price is right, if the role is right, all of the above. With that, let's get into the 3 stars of the week. And we'll start with star number 3. It's going to be Owen Tippett this week. Tippett with 5 points over the course of the 3 games, a goal, 4 assists, +4, ± rating. He obviously had a huge game against St. Louis, which is important, but I think it was very important for him to get some points back on the board, to score a goal again. He had come close a few times. It just hadn't been happening, and to be stuck on 5 goals for as long as he was and not really be contributing in other ways as well, that's really hard to take, and this could be a boost for him. We have to wait, obviously had to wait a very long period here, from the games they had over the weekend where he puts up all 5 of those points to their next game. That'll be Thursday night. We'll see if there's a carryover to all of it. But so far, Tippett had the kind of weekend he needed to have, and that's pretty important for him. Star number 2 is going to be Trevor Zegras. Zegras with the huge game on Friday against St. Louis, 2 goals, an assist, 3 points, and the list can go on and on about him, right? The getting the chance in overtime, essentially a shootout bit, a penalty shot, doesn't score on that to win the game in the moment and complete the hat trick. Goes out in the shootout, gets the goal anyway, does something similar but different, changes up the angle a little bit on Jordan Binnington on what he did on the first penalty shot attempt and scores there, and then they end up winning the game. So he had a very big week and continues to be a bright spot in the Flyers lineup. And for the first star of the week, it's the newcomer we were just talking about, Christian Dvorak. 3 goals, 1 assist for 4 points on the week with a +2 rating as well. He had a pretty impactful week, and I think that continues to show his value to the team. It's not a guy I think that we thought we would be putting into things like that to see him having such big weeks or be one of the top team leaders in goals or points or anything like that. But he's doing it, and he's giving you a lot in the process where you feel like you're really getting, it's turned out to be a really good free agency class for Danny Briere all in all, because even in kind of unique circumstances, right? You get Zegras in the trade, and that's a huge acquisition, and it's been huge since the start of the season. Dan Vladar as a signing has been huge since the start of the season. Dvorak has looked really good. Noah Juleson has started to stabilize his play a little bit more and solidify himself in the number 6 defenseman role. They signed Dennis Gilbert, and after a month and a half of the regular season to this point, were able to trade him to Ottawa and get a player back for the minor leagues on a two-way deal that could have some upside. We're going to have to find out. But if it's anything like the last minor league trade that Danny Briere made, where the Flyers organization gets Christian Kyrou for Samu Tuamala, Kairou's been outstanding in the minors since getting here, and it's going to put him on the map a little bit more in terms of possibly being a player who can help. And if you got him for a player that you really never saw much of a future with in the organization, that's pretty substantial as well. So I don't know what becomes of the Dennis Gilbert trade, and the player that the Flyers get back in that case, but it is certainly possible that, that all of these players have worked out in some capacity, and it's possible that carries on for a longer time. So credit to Christian Dvorak for coming in and being that under-the-radar kind of player that he's been so far and contributing in a way that a lot of people probably didn't expect. So with that, we're going to shift gears and get ready for the next week ahead. Let's start with the look ahead, the upcoming schedule for the Flyers. Thursday night, they take on the St. Louis Blues on home ice this time. That'll quickly close out the season series. Puck drop for that is at 7 p.m. Saturday night hockey between the Flyers and New Jersey Devils. That's this upcoming Saturday, November 22nd at 7 p.m. as well. And then on Monday, the Flyers are going to start a very busy week of Thanksgiving and all the games that come up. It's going to start against the Tampa Bay Lightning on Monday, November 24th at 7 p.m. as well. And we'll go into the rest of that schedule for the week on the next show, because we will do another show before the rest of that weekly schedule is completed, which is going to bring the November schedule to an end. So once they're past those 3 games this weekend and into next week, they will play 3 more, and that's the end of November, and you're on to December, and we're going to certainly, at the very least, we're not quite there yet, and we won't be at the next show. We're going to be just shy of it. But we'll probably be close enough that we can start to have that conversation that gets had about teams and where they're ranked in the standings at American Thanksgiving. So we will certainly look into that and what it may mean for the team going forward, and how that could, impact the rest of their season, whether we should buy in or not, all of that. So there's going to be plenty of questions to ask as we do this next show. Once again, for everybody, follow along with the show and keep up with all of my Flyers coverage. You can read all of my articles on 973ESPN.com. Follow along on Instagram at Kevin_Durso, on TikTok at Kevin_Durso for pre and post game videos to get you ready for the game and tell you what happened, any updates there, some takeaways from the games as well. And obviously here with BFA Sports and BFA Live Sports and everything that they're doing and the platform that they're giving for not only my show, but all of the shows that have been part of regular programming, Nernshaw Radio with Nick Earnshaw, Trust the Mike's podcast on Sixers basketball with Mike Gill and MKB, and the Now Batting for the Phillies podcast with Mike Gill and Bob Wankel on everything Phillies as they enter the offseason. The Sixers in the heart of a regular season, just like the Flyers are. Nicky Earnshaw's got you covered for everything else in Philly sports as well, and it's kind of all over the map there, a 4-for-4 type of show. So this is, as I've said before, this is the start of something that we're trying to build here, and we appreciate you following along with everything that's going on with all of these shows, and I encourage you to tune in throughout the course of the week. Just about every day there's going to be another show that pops up with a new episode, so keep looking out for that. I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited to continue to be doing what I'm doing, covering Flyers hockey as I have been for so long and continue to do so. And like we said, a big week ahead for the Flyers. 2 home games, then they're on the road for the rest of the month, but it'll start with the game in Tampa before we move on to our next show, which will be next week on November 26th. Same time, 11 a.m. will be when the show is live, and you can watch along, and we'll have a lot more to discuss in the world of Flyers hockey. So that is going to just about do it for this week's show. Once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching along. Follow along with me during the course of the week as the Flyers take on the St. Louis Blues on Thursday, the New Jersey Devils on Saturday, or the Tampa Bay Lightning on Monday. Don't forget to look out for 97.3 ESPN.com on Sunday for my Flyers Files observations column that will be kind of a written form of some things. Usually it's a written form for what's coming in the next show, as we did this week with Sam Ersson and with the slow starts and all of that. It's kind of served as kind of like a lead into our discussion topics for the week. So once again, thanks for tuning in. And once again, be on the lookout for all the other shows on the BFA Live Sports platform. I'm Kevin Durso. This is another episode of Flyers Files on BFA Live Sports.